You're listening to the Apple Insider Podcast.
Welcome to episode 3 of our show where we discuss the latest news about Apple, iPhone, iPad, and Mac. We're recording on Thursday, February 12th, 2015. Today we're going to talk about Apple being the first U.S. company to reach a $700 billion market cap, Apple's $850 million investment in a solar energy farm, Tim Cook speaking at Goldman Sachs, an impending MacBook Air refresh, and more. Today we have with us Apple Insider Managing Editor Neil Hughes. Hey Neil, thanks for being here.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
It's going great. And we also have contributing editor Victor Marks again joining us. Hey, Victor.
Hey, good to be here.
Great. And I'm Stephen Robles. So let's get right into it. Apple reaching a $700 billion market cap. They were the first United States company to reach it on Tuesday. They closed at $122.02 per share, and their market cap value was $710 billion, actually a little over that. The first U.S. company to ever do that. And again, that was just a week after they set records for their profitable quarter, most profitable quarter ever, and things like that. And they are now twice the market valuation of Microsoft, which is at $349 billion, and nearly twice that of Google at $365 billion. So just amazing, record-shattering numbers again. My only thing is I'm almost afraid to know how long they can keep it up.
Well, that's Wall Street for you, right? I mean, what does it mean, this market cap? It's just some fictional thing that's created on the market that, people make or lose money based on it, but it's just a weird game that they play there.
Even today, Carl Icahn said it should be $214 a share, even now. So whether you...
Right.
I don't know about that, but...
Well, and he's a major shareholder in Apple, so of course he would like to see it being traded at $216 or whatever he said it should be today. He's a noisemaker, and he wants Apple to invest more in themselves, and he sees it as a no-brainer investment, as he calls it. And obviously, Apple is selling a metric ton of products right now, and they're doing pretty well. But the market is fickle, and the market, for some reason, likes to see 20 to 30 to 50% year-over-year growth. And then meanwhile, we'll drive up or down the stock price of other companies based on arbitrary rules for those companies. Apple's makes more money in a quarter than Amazon's made in their entire existence. Does it have any real relevance to where the share prices are, where they stand? It's hard to say.
Right. But clearly, Apple is still making a ton of money. And what I thought was really interesting, the same day that they broke that record, the market cap value, Tim Cook mentioned that about their $850 million I say investment, but basically they've pledged to buy $850 million worth of power from First Solar, which is a solar company, and they're building this solar plant out in California. And Apple will basically get 130 megawatts of power, enough to power 60,000 California homes. And they're doing this again to offset their new campus, and it will cover over all their retail stores and stuff like that. So just really interesting, and probably a good thing that Apple kind of said one of the things they're going to do with all this money in the near future, especially something green and kind of good for posterity, good on Apple's image.
It's in alignment with their values is the right way to think of that. They have stated time and again what their values are when it comes to good manufacturing practices, when it means about sustainable and environmental impacts of their server farms that they've built. They've always thought about being a good corporate citizen with respect to the rest of the planet and the rest of humanity, especially when it comes to their manufacturing.
Right. And, I thought it was especially interesting. Tim Cook, he spoke at Goldman Sachs again this week, where he mentioned this thing about the solar farm. But, Steve Jobs is always big on green and how their devices are green and mercury-free and aluminum and all that. But it seems like Tim Cook, he's really taken a role over the past several months as almost like a culture, very culture-related, kind of almost a trendsetter. I mean, with their investing in the solar farm, Tim Cook has been very outspoken about marriage equality and things like that. And he's just kind of positioning himself as a cultural figure, not just about technology, but trying to have a positive influence on society as a whole. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely Tim Cook's Apple. You can definitely see the changes that have been made. I mean, obviously, Apple was a green company under Steve Jobs, and he focused on those kind of things. But, there's a famous conversation that took place between Steve Jobs and Al Gore, where Apple just kept getting railed on by Greenpeace, and they were protesting and all that. And it just reached a point where Jobs threw his hands up, and Al Gore told him, he said, listen, you just got to keep doing what you're doing, and you can't worry that much about these people because, they're going to be upset and they're going to do what they do. But, now it's funny to see under Tim Cook because they're a little more open and a little more transparent about what they're doing. Now Greenpeace, every time Apple makes an announcement or does something, they put out a press release saying how great Apple is and how other companies need to follow their lead. So I think that's an example of where maybe Steve Jobs wanted to be more tight-lipped about everything just because that was his policy. And Tim Cook would like to be a little bit more open, and as a result, it just takes the idea of Apple and what they stand for and elevates it in the public consciousness.
Right. And, when Tim Cook took over as CEO, there was a lot of talk, whether if he was going to be as strong of a figure as Jobs was. And I think he's proven, especially recently, how tenacious he can be. One of the quotes from this past Tuesday, he said, "We know that climate change is real. Our view is that the time for talk has passed and the time for action is now. We've shown that with what we've done." And I think that's Cook saying, we're going to make our actions speak just as loud as our words, if not louder. And they're willing to spend money to do it.
Well, put that number in perspective. Apple, as of last quarter, had $170 billion in cash.
Right.
So, are they $700 billion? Is that what they're worth? Because apparently they have a good chunk of that just sitting around in the bank. That's pretty wild when you think about it.
Right. And even the $850 million investment in the solar stuff, it's a huge number. It's a massive amount of money. But then when you look at it in perspective, it's 170th or 120th of their cash.
Tim Cook takes that out of his couch at the HQ. This is not a ton of money in the grand scheme of things, but that's where they can kind of put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and stand for things that are important to them. And while it may be pocket change for Tim and for Apple, it makes a huge difference for the future of green energy and the investments that go into it and making it feasible for mass market.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that I'd been thinking about was that years ago, there was a Phil Schiller quote where Phil had said that, that's awfully personal, Mr. Schiller had said that, that at the time they were debating whether or not they ought to make a phone or they could make a car. And I was thinking about this, Tesla is worth decent money, but if Apple wanted to purchase Tesla, it would be just a couple of quarters. They'd only have to have a couple of good quarters and they could buy a car company. And
that was also in the news this week, and we had a piece on AppleInsider saying Apple is going to basically looking into making a car and to give Tesla a run for its money. And it sounds kind of crazy on the face of it, but again, when you think about what Tim Cook is doing in the realms, they're still in technology realms, but in the realms outside their own devices, again, like the solar plant and all this kind of stuff, it's more feasible to think, well, a car is nowadays just a computer on wheels. Why wouldn't they try something? Just do some research, if anything.
Sure. But the other thing is that there's a lot of employee poaching between Apple and Tesla. When Tesla wants new employees, they hire Apple employees away. And one way to put a stop to that is simply buy Tesla.
It's hard to read too much into this stuff because you could look at the employee poaching and be like, oh, Tesla's hiring a bunch of Apple people. Do they want to make a phone? They're talented people working in technology. And, I am sure that in Apple's secret labs, they have some projects out there in their skunk works that are pretty crazy and pretty out there that never see the light of day. I'm sure they're dabbling with things. They want to skate to where the puck's going to be. They're thinking about the future of technology, and it's possible, maybe not 5 years from now, but maybe 15 years from now, that a smart car that connects in with the rest of your devices is a market that they might want to be interested in or get into. But it's hard to see them doing something in the near term with a so-called iCar. I find that hard to believe.
Yeah. Well, we can move on. I just wanted to point out also we had a video on AppleInsider with Apple's new campus, again, all going in with the whole energy deal, and some exclusive look. And then later we had some pictures. Apple allowed some media personnel to actually take pictures up close. So I'll put those links in show notes and definitely take a look at that, Apple's new Campus 2 up close. So I also want to mention MacBook Air It's looking like the refresh is imminent, and it's going to be refreshed with the Intel Broadwell chips. Possibly late this month, we'll see the refresh. And I tweeted out on Sunday, I was asking readers kind of what features they were looking for, and we were talking right before the show kind of what we were hoping to see in a refresh. So I know you guys mentioned, and we definitely, hopefully they'll put more RAM as default, because right now it's still 4 gigs of RAM in a MacBook Air. I think 8, I think it really needs to be the default in Apple's laptops nowadays.
Just for perspective, the original iMac, the Bondi Blue iMac, the maximum that it could take was 512 meg, and officially the spec was for 256. And you could run OS 10 10.1 on that thing.
Yeah, well,
we've come a long way.
We've come a long way.
Well, the iPhone still had 512 megs of RAM in it up until recently, so there you go.
Yeah,
that's very true. But hopefully more RAM and definitely more SSD storage. I know a couple of you guys were saying that, you guys hurting for storage now, and it would just be really nice. I think right now the minimum is still it's 128 on the lowest end model.
Yeah, it used to be 64.
Right, but 128 gigs, even it's on the $899 11-inch MacBook Air. That should hopefully at least be 256, and then all the other ones. 500 seems like a minimum now, for especially the size of apps that we're dealing with. And if eventually the MacBook Air gets into Retina territory, all the apps usually tend to be bigger then, and there's going to be especially things like Pixelmator or other apps that have to do with graphic editing.
Yeah, but the thing is, we're doing this wrong. We are using our computers wrong. If you think back, Steve Jobs always used his computer in a way where he was basically network booting. He would open his laptop and sign in, and it would boot off his network drive. And it didn't matter which computer he used. He signed into any one of them, and it worked. And if you use a computer like that, you don't need local storage. We're getting there with cloud services. We're not there yet, certainly. But if that's the future we want, then local storage becomes irrelevant.
Well, I'll give you an example. So I'm on an iMac right now. It's a terabyte drive, and I kind of do what you're talking about. I use iTunes Match for my music, so I have no local music or movies on my machine, and I actually download a minimum of apps, but having the Adobe Creative Suite on a computer and things like Final Cut and Logic, it starts eating away. And so again, 128, if you want to do anything more than email and web browsing, even if you're not keeping your music and movie library on your computer, I think you definitely need some more space. But one of the other things that people said they wanted was, and a lot of people have said this for a long time, was built-in cellular data on a MacBook Air. And I think it'd be a great feature, but I just don't see Apple doing that.
No, especially not with, if you're running Yosemite and iOS 8, you can enable your personal hotspot on your phone without even changing any settings on it. You just hit a button and it's good to go. And if you have a modern, shared data plan, then they don't charge you extra for tethering anymore. So I don't think there's much of a need to integrate 3G.
Now, they used to. There were prototypes that made it out to eBay that had cellular antennae in the screen frames. But I agree with Neil. There's simply no need when your phone does the same job. The thing that people responded that I really was interested in was people responded saying they'd like to see Touch ID in the MacBook Air.
Yeah, a lot of people.
This makes so much sense.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to have it there. And then the follow-up question was, where would they put it?
Well, that's a big design problem, because if you look at the MacBook Air, you've got 2 palm rests and a trackpad. And you need to figure out some way that you can implement it into one of these things elegantly. One thing you could do is, remember the power button used to be a circle up above the keyboard before it became a key on the keyboard?
Right.
And you could go ahead and put the Touch ID sensor up in that kind of location. But I want to talk about the utility of it, because I think that it's really expanding on the promise of Apple Pay as a way of paying online.
Yeah,
and I think it also works for dovetailing in with the built-in password management that OS 10 provides for Safari users.
Right. No, I'm totally for it. I would love to have it. I feel like location would be the only feasible option, because the thing about the phone, and less so the iPad, but even so, the home button is kind of a natural place for your thumb to be when you wake it up. On a laptop, if it's already on, usually I don't power off my laptop a lot, but usually you open it from the little clamshell thing by the trackpad, and I just don't see a Touch ID sensor there.
Well, you could put one in the corner between the trackpad and the palm rest right under the command key. That would be natural enough. But the thing is, it's not natural at all that home is where your finger rests when you wake it up. It's natural because we've had 8 years of using iPhones to make it feel natural. You have to remember that when Touch ID was on Motorola phones before it became an Apple product, that it was on the back of the phone. There's nothing that dictates that it has to be in a specific place. It's just that it has to be in a place that's easy for us to reach and looks beautiful when you open the laptop.
Now, if I had to guess, I'd say, because Apple likes to kind of use parts across devices, and that way they can mass produce it and save a few bucks. I would say, as Victor said, you just change the power button back to a circle, and you use the same home button that you already have, the technology that's already there in the iPhone. You just put it up there in the upper right corner on your MacBook, and when you need to authorize, you just tap there. I know a lot of people would like to have it in the trackpad, but the problem with that is the way Touch ID is implemented right now is there's a ring around the outside of the home button that sends the charge through your finger that allows it to work.
Right.
I don't know how that would work on a trackpad because you'd have to be touching the edge of the trackpad if they use the same technology in order for it to work. Now, maybe they've got a way around that, but I don't know.
Never doubt the engineering prowess, right? When you just said blue sky, what could we do instead of that won't work? So if you say, what could we do? What if you lace copper in the glass as you're making the glass and you use the copper impregnated in the glass across the whole trackpad? I'm just making this up.
And you just said impregnated, so I don't know if I don't know where I am with this. But we did have an article last week talking about Apple was researching Touch ID technology into screens, and that is something where I have seen some Android users be able to wake up their phone just by tapping the screen twice, which that is kind of a natural location for your thumb because that's where it's going to be whenever you're about to open the app right after the phone's on. So that seems like, kind of an intelligent place to put it, but I doubt we're going to see this in the refresh for MacBook Airs this month or next. But
you have to make a distinction too. There's the refresh of the MacBook Airs, and then there's the mythical 12-inch Retina MacBook Air. It's looking like what we're probably going to get is a refresh to the existing design, which, if history is any indication, there won't be any physical changes to those laptops. They're going to look just like the previous MacBook Airs.
Right.
They're just going to have some specs changed on the inside, and that's going to be it. And they're going to save an entirely new design for the 12-inch model, which is the same thing that they did when they introduced the Retina MacBook Pro. If they take the same approach, then that's probably what they're going to do, and Apple tends to be pretty predictable in terms of how they do this kind of thing. So I think that's what everybody's expecting at this point.
That's true. And the last thing I'll say, some people did mention more Thunderbolt or USB ports on the MacBook Air.
I want a 5 1/4 floppy drive.
Yeah, that was someone did tweet us and say that.
I have 8-inch floppies and I have 5 1/4-inch floppies, and about 2 weeks ago I had to revive a 3.5-inch floppy.
Wow. Are any of them Oregon Trail? That's all I want to know.
Dang it. No, I actually had Mosaic, the original web browser running on iOS 9.2, not iOS, on macOS 9.2.
Okay, I almost
said System 9.2.
I was going to say.
System at that point.
Yeah.
No, I had, I was running Mosaic. I had to run the old web browser.
Yeah, well, I don't see a floppy drive in there, but hopefully we'll see the refresh later this month. So that's it for the MacBook Air. One of our other stories was iOS 8.3. The first beta was released to developers along with Swift 1.2, the next iteration of Swift. And in iOS 8.3, there was a CarPlay wireless support. And also in related news, Swift has been picked up by American Airlines, LinkedIn, and Getty in their making of the app. Now, as far as CarPlay, I have actually yet to see it in person or even see some of the third-party.
I have 2 CarPlay units. I have a Pioneer in one of my vehicles, and I have the Alpine ILX 007 in the other vehicle.
So now, as of right now, it is not. You have to have it tethered physically with a cable.
It is currently, to use a CarPlay unit, you plug in a lightning cable.
Okay.
Which is brilliant. It's so good.
Well, but even wireless would be even better.
No.
No, you don't think so?
No.
Why is that?
Pairing the phone is garbage. I never want to have to deal with Bluetooth pairing ever again.
What if it automatically pairs, though? Why would that be an issue?
I mean, you only pair it the first time.
If it worked the first time every time, yes. But the first time it breaks, die in a fire.
I will say, when I sit in a rental car and try to pair my phone, it is a headache.
It's garbage. It's absolute abomination.
Don't you think it would be easier through Apple's CarPlay system? I mean, usually pairing Bluetooth devices on an iOS device is pretty straightforward.
If it works the first time. Have you tried Bluetooth Low Energy and seen how many of the Bluetooth Low Energy wearable devices do not recognize or fall off the end of the earth in the middle of synchronizing or pretend to sync forever? Try and firmware update a wearable fitness bracelet and tell me again that these things just work, even though you don't have to go to settings and pair Bluetooth. It works 100% of the time, all the time, great. If it works, if 60% of the time it works,
it's maddening.
100% of the time it works, 60% of the time, forget it.
You sound like you've been burned by Bluetooth. It's
and
painful.
Wi-Fi is brilliant, but the power management issues around Wi-Fi are also huge. You will drain down your phone in a heartbeat. There's a lot of sense to plugging in your phone.
Well, I don't think that's going to go away. I think this is just a new option for people that want it to connect wirelessly. So if you want to stay wired and you want to run Ethernet everywhere and do all that, you can do it. But for the rest of us that want it wireless, it's nice to have the option.
Wireless is for you're getting in your car, you're leaving your phone in your pocket because you're going on a 5-minute drive or a 10-minute drive, and you want it to work. That's fine. That makes great sense, and God bless you. But the call quality over the wired Lightning connection is brilliant. You plug it in, it launches. It's brilliant. There's simply no failure there.
Okay.
That's what I value out of an Apple experience, is that there's no failure. And I will admit that we haven't been seeing that across every iOS release. But and there are some flaws in CarPlay. There are CarPlay crashes, but by God, the Lightning connection makes a lot of sense.
Well, and with the CarPlay and other iOS features, they're saying that there's going to be a lot of bug fixes and stability changes brought to iOS, and they thought maybe we'd have to wait till iOS 9, but it looks like a lot of those stability things will come out in these point updates. I'm really hoping that it fixes AirDrop from iOS to Mac. I don't know if you guys use that often, but that's very hit and miss for me.
Completely unreliable, and it's unreliable from iPhone to iPhone, from iPhone to iPad. I try to use it all the time, and I end up just iMessaging stuff to myself rather than using AirDrop because it'll show up on one device but not another. It's really frustrating.
The show is going to run on for 2 hours if we talk about all of the things that could be fixed.
That's a lot of
AirPlay
stuff.
From iOS device to Apple TV, or AirPlay from Mac to Apple TV, for one thing, would be great to see fixed.
I will say AirPlay for me is pretty solid.
Are you mirroring from your Mac?
No, I'm sorry. AirPlay is solid from iOS.
AirPlay works fine for me, but here's what's strange about it. If I'm using my Apple TV and it's plugged in over Ethernet, it doesn't work very well. If it's over Wi-Fi, it works great. Why?
Right.
So here's the thing about Apple TV that no one will tell you, is that if you're plugged in through Ethernet, you must turn off Wi-Fi on the Apple TV, and then Ethernet works brilliantly.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Well, yeah.
Again, the show will run on for 2 hours if you talk about all the things that can be fixed.
Well, I just hope they fix AirDrop. I will say, I just want to say real quick, my Apple TV setup, I don't know if many users know this with Apple TV, but the Apple TV can actually AirPlay sound to an Airport Express that's connected to speakers. Right. And that's what I have set up in my bedroom. I have speakers by the bed.
It's not just an Airport Express. It is any AirPlay speaker.
Right, very true.
So you can get the Philips AirPlay speakers, you can get the iHome AirPlay speakers, whatever you want to do, and use those as your speakers for your Apple TV.
Right.
Now, let me ask you, Stephen, do you get an audio drift over time? Because I've had that problem with my Airport Express over the years.
No, for some reason. Now, I will say, sometimes I have to restart the Airport Express because it loses the connection, and the Apple TV just wants to play it out of the TV speakers. But after I reset it, I could watch for a couple hours and I don't see it. And I can even AirPlay from my iPhone or iPad to the Apple TV, and the video's there and the audio's still coming through the speakers that I have plugged in the Airport Express. So that's one place.
It's a really cool setup, but I've done like a multi-room setup with Airport Express, and what happens is it's a known bug that's been there from the beginning, since before it was even known as AirPlay, where over time the audio from each room will just drift a little bit further apart and a little bit further apart, and AirTunes and now AirPlay. And so it's still a bug or a problem that's there that's just, I guess, an issue inherent with wireless networking, where they just drift slowly over time, and then you end up with this weird feeling where the music is off from one room and another, and you're like, you got to go and reset it and restart it.
I don't know how much drift that is, but it's a noticeable drift.
Okay.
You start getting annoyed at how bad things are when you get a 40 millisecond difference.
Yes.
And it's bad.
It's bad.
I did want to bring up before we move on that one of the things I like to do is watch what developers have to say about things. And Will Shipley was tweeting that. Well, Will Shipley's been a long time developer. He said that in 1987, when he saw Cocoa, that he knew at that moment that was the time that he wanted to devote his life to backing that technology and helping it spread and helping other people use it because it was so amazing. And he declared that he's not going to do Coke or Objective-C anymore, that he is moving everything to Swift because it is that moment again, that he is so confident in the latest Swift release.
Wow. Well, and I'm also, hopefully, the top story on Apple Insider right now is Piper Jaffray sees a revamped Apple TV in the fall. And of course, there's been talk that the Apple TV will be the center of HomeKit once we finally start seeing devices.
Well, Apple TV will play a large role in HomeKit, but the whole revised Apple TV thing is another Gene Munster downfall.
Well, now I'm not talking about like a TV, but at least refresh the box, because it's been, I think, at least 2 years.
We could use more RAM and a better processor in it, but those are, those are wires and pliers or specs kind of geek things. And what is it that you think you'd really want to change about the Apple TV experience as a whole?
They bought PrimeSense. I mean, so you got to think that they're looking into some sort of a motion control of some type, right? I mean, that would be why you buy that company.
Right. And, since we're on TV, this was actually a story I had in the optional section, but Dish's Sling TV, the service came out, and it's allowing you to stream some channels live, like TNT, TBS, and some ESPN. Mm-hmm. And I guess even hopefully the Apple TV hardware, whether that gets updated or not, it'd be great to see some of these services live on the Apple TV, so you don't have to have this disconnect from you have to AirPlay it, for these certain channels. And I really noticed it this past weekend. I was trying to watch the Grammys, and we talked about net neutrality last week, and this kind of plays into it, but it was impossible to stream the Grammys even with CBS All Access. I actually signed up for it that night.
Was that partly because they didn't have a good content distribution network? They weren't using Akamai or any of these other services to make the stream work?
No, it was, you had to sign up for CBS All Access, and you could stream it through the app on iPad. Which
is it the $5 a month one?
Yes, and I was happy to do it for the one night. They actually had a 7-day free trial, so I was like, I don't even have to pay anything. So I signed up, and when I fired up the app on my iPad, it said, this content is not available in your area. And that was it. That was the end.
You want to talk about cable companies. As much as Victor hates Bluetooth connections and wireless connections, I hate cable companies that much more, because I tell you what, they are just, it's a nightmare dealing with these companies, and I've been doing the same. I just moved into a place here in Brooklyn and got set up with Time Warner Cable, and they bundle everything together, and they gave me a phone number. And I'm watching TV the other day. I didn't even know I had a phone number, and it's telling me on the TV that I got a phone call coming in. And how did they get the number? I don't even know the number. Somebody's calling me on this number. I'm paying for a phone line,
Yeah.
And there it is. I'm getting phone calls, and so it's great to see this Sling TV, and we could be getting web-based stuff. And I was talking to my wife about the other night, and I was like, that'd be great, just pay for ESPN and not have to pay Time Warner for it. But the problem is they're going to bundle it anyhow. I'm going to end up paying for ESPN anyhow because I got to buy internet through them, right? I have no other choice.
You do have a choice, but it's hard. I called up Time Warner and I said, I don't want your bundle, and I don't want your phone, and I don't want your TV. All I want is internet. And they tried a couple of times to give me good bundle prices, and I said simply, listen, only the internet, and that's it. And I have a 50 megabit down. And you pay more
if you just want to get the internet.
No, I'm paying less. I'm paying $70 for 50 megabits down.
For how long? Until they change your bill, right?
I've had that deal for 2.5, 3 years now.
Well, you are one of the few, my friend.
I will say Bright House down in Central Florida, where I'm at, they've let me pay just for internet for the past 5 years. So they do that, but the problem is, again, this CBS All Access was not available in my area because Bright House has some kind of monopoly. And even with this Sling TV player, I would love to have these channels. I don't want to have my iPad just to watch TV, first of all, because it doesn't live on the Apple TV. But even as these networks open up to services like this, it's all whether the cable provider in your area is going to allow it or not. And if they don't allow CBS, my goodness,
And there's these stupid disputes they have, too. I was trying to watch a show the other night, and it turned out that because ABC and Time Warner don't get along, they make Time Warner customers wait an extra week in order to get their on-demand content, even though it's available on every other platform the day before. So, right. If you're on Comcast, then you're great. But if you're on Time Warner, you're screwed, and I don't have a choice.
Right.
Yeah, the best is when they get in a fight with a local channel, and they insist you call the local channel, and they put the 800 number of the local channel up and say, you go call them and tell them you want Time Warner to
fight our battles for us. Yeah, what a horrible customer service policy all these companies have. And we're in the midst of a big contract dispute that you don't care about at all. We want you to call on our behalf anyhow because you're the victim in the end here.
Right. And the last thing I'll mention, I was trying to get CBS, it wasn't working. All these channels, yada yada. I have a $30 antenna stuck to my window of my house, going straight into my TV, and I get CBS, ABC, NBC, and HD all completely free. And
better quality, too, because it's not compressed.
Right, and I can watch it whenever I want. So I'm like, I don't even pay for that. I just bought a $30 antenna, and I can watch it whenever I want, but I can't. I'm willing to pay. Let me pay $5 or $10 to get NBC and CBS live on my Apple TV, and it's just not happening. So I'm sure many people can identify with that as well, but...
Well, Apple's supposedly been in talks with the content providers. They want to work out a deal. And if anybody's going to work out a deal with them, it's going to be ABC, ESPN, because they have a close relationship with Apple. And that would be great. And that's a great start. ESPN is really the biggest hurdle. You now have ESPN on Sling TV, so it's a start. You've got HBO going online only for subscribers in a few months. That's a start. It's headed in the right direction, but, at some point, everybody's going to have to deal with their cable company and try to get out of these bundles and try to do all this because they're going to throw in a phone number, and if you want to get on demand, then you have to upgrade to their next tier, and then they're going to give you a discounted price for a certain amount of time, and then they're going to rack it up after 6 months. It's to borrow a term from Steve Jobs, it's a bag of hurt, and Apple's trying to cut through it, and they're apparently trying to negotiate behind the scenes and get something worked out, but they got a long way to go, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
What I do like about Apple TV is every content channel on it is treated as a first citizen. There's no one that rises above the others with special treatment other than placement on the screen, where iTunes Store is always in the upper left. That's one of the things I really find valuable. I've been using Amazon Fire TV Stick and Chromecast. And Chromecast, everything's mostly neutral because everything is you choose from your phone. But Fire definitely places Amazon above all others. Mm-hmm. And I really, really value where Apple's made it a flat playing field.
What I love about my Apple TV too is I use Hulu all the time. That's basically how I watch TV, and it glitches just enough where it just skips the commercials on Hulu for some reason. Nice,
good for you.
So it gets to a commercial break, it flickers, and then it goes past it. I say, that's great.
What I would really like is for the people behind Hulu who maintain the Apple TV channel, I wish that they would update it so that it would mark episodes that are new with a flag so you could see it instead of having to go in and see if it's the time to watch a new episode.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's one of the things that they did right when they wrote Hulu for Amazon Fire TV Stick. But otherwise...
The one thing I want more than anything from a new Apple TV, you can have games and apps and all that, but good voice control. I have an Xbox One. It is insane to me how poor the voice control can be on a device that has a dedicated camera and microphone that is always plugged into the wall. The fact that my phone that runs in my pocket on a battery can have better voice control than a dedicated box sitting in front of the TV with a microphone 2 feet in front of my face is just ridiculous to me. That it has no natural language support. It doesn't understand what I'm saying. If I tell my Xbox to change the channel to CNBC, it changes it to country music television every single time. It does not understand CNBC.
That's crazy.
And that is an area where Apple could come in and clean up, because if you look at the options that are available now, there's a lot of cheap streaming devices, but nobody's really nailed the voice control and the motion control in the living room. And Microsoft's been trying for a while now, but it's embarrassing how bad it is.
And the Amazon Fire TV is getting there.
Yeah, well, the Amazon Fire TV and Fire TV Stick both have voice control with Fire TV Stick. You have to use it from an app on your phone.
Right. But
the problem is they treat Amazon as the first citizen and everything else is second class. They will only do voice for Amazon service. And if you're doing an Apple TV, you really want it to be a unified experience across all of the channels.
Yeah. And I don't want to fumble around for my phone. I don't want to fumble around for a remote and have to pick it up and hold it up and talk into it. I mean, come on.
Well, I do want a remote. I don't get rid of the remote because that's the thing that kills me about Chromecast. Do not get rid of the remote. Keep the 6-button remote.
Chromecast, I stopped using it a day after I got it. It was just, it's so difficult. Well, anyway, okay, so let's, I think we've ranted on TV for quite some time. I'll put it up to a vote. We have the Phorm feature that went up today about the tactile interface technology on iPad, and we can also talk about the IBM partnership and how Apple is, quote unquote, kind of controlling what the salespeople do in their presentations. What do you guys want to do, IBM or the Phorm?
I guess let's talk about the Phorm. That was a big story today, right?
Yeah, it was a big feature.
Yeah, it's interesting technology. I can't really see it catching on in its current form with a giant case that you have to put around your iPad and what have you. But and the other thing is the buttons don't really press. It's just kind of a thing that you can feel there. This almost feels in a lot of ways like a solution in search of a problem at this point. I don't know that it really would make typing that much better, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that the point of having a touchscreen keyboard is that the keyboard can change to reflect necessary buttons for an app. When you're in a web browser, you get a .com button. Right. When you're entering numbers, you can get a numerical number pad. The Phorm in its current state doesn't allow for that kind of change. But having those places to help you locate your fingers on the touchscreen could be helpful. Maybe.
Yeah.
The reason for the giant case is that that's where the liquid reservoir is, because the liquid comes in to make it tactile and then retreats when your keyboard isn't up.
The only way that this technology catches on is if it gets acquired by Apple or somebody else, and it gets integrated at a hardware and software level. I mean, imagine if you had an iPhone and in the software, a developer could have a game where when it loaded up the game, it would put little buttons on the screen that you could feel while you were playing it, and that would be, and so you could have dynamic things that could show up on the screen on an app-by-app basis. But as it stands right now, using your iPad mini in portrait mode to type with your thumbs, you can't even press them in. All it lets you do is feel where the buttons are that you can see below anyhow. I don't see that really catching on.
Well, just helping you locate makes sense. The question is, who really needs this? Like you said, whose problem are we solving?
Right. The gaming thought, though, is really interesting because a lot of times, I'll just play even just short little games, and it is kind of that disconnect. You kind of have to look to where your fingers are if they drift a little bit. The prototype that they had where the reservoir liquid is built in was really interesting. You can look at our video on AppleInsider. They like if you open the Notes app and the keyboard pops up, the bubbles just appear, and when you go back home, the bubbles just disappear automatically. And that's a pretty cool software implementation of the physical little knobs on there. And again, I don't know how, because the reservoirs right now are kind of built into that.
It's the case.
Into the case, right? So to be able to adapt it depending on the game that's being displayed, or if you go to horizontal portrait, I'm sure they're working on that, but I'm sure that's pretty difficult too.
The current technology is that there are little microscopic holes drilled into the places between, which is how the liquid knows where to go. It goes where that hole is, right? It's physics. Science, man.
It's because of science.
So unless you could dynamically rearrange physical holes, the laws of physics do not work this way. So it's a cool invention.
It's very cool, yeah.
For specific use cases.
If the buttons could be pressed, then I think it would be a lot more interesting. But, I mean, I think you're still going to have to look down at the keyboard anyhow. I don't know that feeling it is really going to help in that situation. I can't really see this catching on the way it is right now. It's a really cool gee whiz kind of thing, but I don't really see it catching on.
If you're an Apple retail employee and you are greeting people and checking them in for a Genius Bar appointment and typing their names and doing these things for 8-hour a day, right? Maybe it makes sense because you're touch typing all the darn time, and this is a way of just locating your fingers quickly without having to look.
I think the old diehard BlackBerry fans would be all over it. Well, because they're making an iPhone 6 Plus prototype.
Yeah, but the old BlackBerry diehard fans, where the heck are they?
They're dying off.
Waterloo, Canada is not succeeding on the backs of RIM, so those guys are all gone.
I haven't heard anything of BlackBerry in the news for a long time, actually.
Well, they actually just released their retro phone, the throwback one that they have for all the BlackBerry Classic, they call it.
Really?
I'm sure they'll sell a lot of those,
Wow.
for people that want. Yeah. I don't know who's going to buy it, but good for them for trying and for sticking around. It feels like too little, too late for them. But hey.
Oh, last thing I'll mention. It's kind of a news popped up today. The Pinterest integration with iOS. Apparently, if you go to Pinterest app on your iPhone or iPad, you'll be able to install apps directly from Pinterest without even going to the App Store. And it's the first, I think, social media application that allows you to do that. Twitter, you can click install app and they take you to the App Store, but Pinterest, it'll install directly to the device. So interesting, especially being Pinterest, that they're the first one to do this.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised Pinterest is still a thing. It's not really my area. My wife was on it for a little while, but she told me that people were losing interest in it because I guess there was less creating and more just sharing other people's stuff. So I don't know how well Pinterest is doing right now, but it certainly seems like interesting integration for the App Store.
Yeah, and it'd be great if it could move on to, it would be really nice too, is if you can see an app on your Mac on a web browser, like, you read articles all day about a new app that comes out, to just be able to say install on my iOS device and all of a sudden, boom, it's there. And because Android has that to an extent, if you browse Google Play on the web, you can install the app on your phone. And iTunes, you can kind of do that if you have automatic app downloads enabled, but it's not the same.
Yeah, definitely an area that needs improvement.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you, Neil and Victor, and all of you guys for joining us. Neil, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, you can read my stuff at AppleInsider, and I'm on a Twitter account. This is Neil.
Very good. And Victor, where can people find you?
I am at VMarks on Twitter, and I write awesome stuff for AppleInsider.
Very good. And I'm at Stephen Robles on Twitter. You can see my stuff on AppleInsider as well. If you like the show, we encourage you to please go to the iTunes store and rate it with 5 stars and leave a comment. We'd really appreciate it if you do that. And of course, subscribe. You guys have been great and keeping us in the top 10 in the technology and tech news categories on iTunes. So we really appreciate it. Go rate it and subscribe. You can find show notes on the post that will go up at appleinsider.com, and you'll have links to all the articles that we mentioned. And of course, follow at AppleInsider on Twitter. Tweet at us when you have questions or suggestions for podcast topics and stuff that we can talk about on the air. Thanks for joining us again, and we'll see you next week. All right.